One of the most touching moments of the 2026 Academy Awards for me was Rachel McAdams' in memoriam tribute to Diane Keaton.
Believe me when I say there isn't an actress of my generation who is not inspired by and enthralled with her absolute singularity.
She described Keaton as a woman who wore many hats, both literally and figuratively, and that couldn't be more true. Her career was so vast, spanning several decades and encompassing so many different genres and mediums. Her senior ensemble comedies like Book Club, her operatic, ambitious dramas like Reds and the Godfather trilogy, her fashion and photography books, even her underrated streak behind the camera as a director. Did you know she directed an episode of Twin Peaks? But the image most people likely conjure in their minds when talking about Diane Keaton is Annie Hall. That performance earned Keaton an Academy Award for Best Actress and became so intimately identified with her that she became conflated with Annie for pretty much the rest of her career.
You are Annie Hall. I mean, who else could have played that part?
I don't know.
So in today's video, I'd like to take a look at Annie Hall and explore why its legacy has endured for so long. Why did Keaton walk away with the Oscar in a famously crowded Best Actress lineup? How did her daring performance in Looking for Mr. Goodbar that same year affect critics' perception of her? Of course, we have to address the tiny bespectacled elephant in the room. This period in Keaton's career is inextricably linked with Woody Allen. My approach on this channel is to accurately and honestly illustrate how critics and audiences discussed films upon their release, and in order to do that here, we have to understand Keaton and Allen as collaborators. This shouldn't be read as excusing his behavior or that I think we should turn a blind eye. I think there's a place and an occasion to litigate how we address the work of men like him, but for now, especially in the wake of Diane Keaton's passing, it's important to me to honor her career and give her the credit she so deserves. So let's get into it. But before we get started, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video. I don't know if you've noticed, but society seems like it's completely falling apart. At least that's what it seems like to me. I haven't always known how to balance staying informed with doom scrolling to the point where I'm absolutely convinced that the wrong person in the military is going to fall into an AI psychosis and launch a nuke. You know what I mean? And at a certain point, you have to learn how to handle that anxiety and direct that energy toward something more productive. I mean, I think of mental health as having airplane safety logic. You have to put on your own mask before you can help others. Taking care of myself has helped motivate me to connect with my community and actually make concrete steps toward a better future for myself and others. We all have to figure out how to do that, and one way you can is by starting therapy. BetterHelp, the sponsor of today's video, makes starting therapy easier. All you have to do is fill out a quick questionnaire where you can specify your goals and the kind of therapist you're looking for. You'll be matched with a licensed therapist who you can communicate with however you feel most comfortable, via phone, video, or even text. If after you have a few sessions, you feel like you haven't found the best match for you yet, that's okay too. You can switch at any time, no extra cost. Get started on your journey toward a healthier lifestyle with over 6 million people who've already signed up with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description box below or go to betterhelp.com/BeKindRewind and get 10% off your first month of therapy. If you were an avid theater goer in New York City in 1968, you might have known who Diane Keaton was. If you knew her as the one cast member in Hair, a rock musical about the countercultural lifestyle of hippies, who refused to take her clothes off for the musical's infamous nude scene. It wasn't for any sort of philosophical reason, she later told the New York Times. It was just that I was too scared. No one on the show pressured her to do anything she didn't want to do, thank God, but in remaining clothed, she unwittingly established a truism that would last throughout her career. Diane Keaton's strength was her singularity. Her instincts, her idiosyncrasies, even her insecurities coalesced into something absolutely unique that would always grab your attention. She remained in that show for 9 months before attending an audition that would alter the fate of her career forever. Woody Allen's latest play, Play It Again, Sam. In 1969, Woody Allen was an established, respected name in comedy. He'd recorded albums, performed stand-up regularly on stage and television, hosted television specials starring some of the biggest names in the industry, wrote and directed films. In 1966, he wrote his first Broadway play, Don't Drink the Water, a farce about the American ambassador to a fictional country behind the Iron Curtain, which was a massive success and ran for over 500 performances. All of this is to say, a role in one of his plays would have been a really nice step for someone who had just only made her Broadway debut. The pair clicked right away at the audition, bonding over social anxieties that they exercised on stage every night. "We both have our definite problems," she told the New York Times. "I understood him and he understands me. When I first read for the part in the play, I remember thinking that Woody seemed as scared of me as I was of him, and he really was." The show was enormously successful, playing for over 400 performances on Broadway and earning Keaton a Tony nomination for Best Featured Actress in a Play. I'll say more about her role in that show in a minute, but at this point, it's just important to establish that Play It Again, Sam was essentially the launching pad for her career. Shortly after the play closed, she made her film debut in Lovers and Other Strangers, a romantic comedy in which a young couple prepares for their wedding as their loved ones' marriages around them fall apart. This film is worth watching for two reasons. One, it features the song For All We Know, which won the Oscar for Best Original Song and was later popularized by the Carpenters. And two, it's just fun to watch B. Arthur and Diane Keaton act together.
Do you know what I'm talking about, Joan?
Sex.
You said it, not me.
Keaton plays the waspy daughter-in-law navigating her relationship with her colorful Italian-American in-laws as her feelings for her husband fade. Watch 10 seconds of this.
Vinny chased her down the block and grabbed her by the hair.
And Carmel spit right in Vinny's face.
And Vinny started choking her by the throat.
And you might understand why a certain someone was inspired to cast her in a certain something.
I saw her in a movie called Lovers and Other Strangers, and two things. I just thought I just liked her myself. I thought she was a cute woman, I just was attracted to her. But also because she was so eccentric and kind of weird in a way, her delivery, that I thought this character of Kay could be like really straight, boring character, and that maybe Diane would bring some eccentricity to it.
In her next film, The Godfather, and its sequel, released 2 years later, Keaton plays Kay, Michael Corleone's fiancée, then wife, who grows increasingly alienated from him as he embraces the family business. I obviously don't want to understate the impact of The Godfather on Keaton's career. We all know how monumentally successful those films were. But going back and actually looking at the press coverage of her from this time, it's actually amazing how infrequently The Godfather comes up. Although the films need Kay to successfully chart Michael's moral decay, she is by no means a focal point in either film. And Keaton, like Kay, would essentially be sidelined in the press for the titanic masculine personalities of Francis Ford Coppola, Al Pacino, Marlon Brando, and later Robert De Niro. If The Godfather came up in interviews or articles about her, it was usually a brief aside. In fact, she's barely even acknowledged in reviews of the films themselves. For example, when The Godfather Part 2 came out in 1974, after Keaton had become more of a name, New York Times critic Vincent Canby quickly mentions her as Michael's square, long-suffering wife. Pauline Kael and Roger Ebert do something similar. John Doerr of The Hollywood Reporter simply notes she's returned to create her role, and that's pretty much it. Even Michael Schumacher's biography of Coppola spends pages and pages detailing how Pacino and Brando were cast and doesn't even bother to explain why they wanted Keaton. She simply just appears at the rehearsal. So while The Godfather clearly affected her career in terms of credibility and visibility, there are even multiple meta references to it in her other films from this time.
Yeah, I seen the movie. Yeah, Pacino, something, right?
Mm-hmm. She really made a name for herself in Woody Allen's films, and her performances in those films dominated the way she was discussed by critics, which makes sense given how much more substantial the roles were. And total side note, but isn't it crazy that she was only paid $6,000 to be in the first Godfather movie? So let's actually get into the Woody Allen collaborations. Technically, their first filmed project together was Men of Crisis, the Harvey Wallinger story, a mockumentary that follows the career of a fictional advisor to Richard Nixon. Keaton plays his wife.
She is Renata Baldwin, who attends Vassar College, where she studies to be a blacksmith.
And is very funny in it.
I'm, independently wealthy. Yes, I come from a very good family. They're not Jewish.
The special was filmed in 1971 for PBS, but never actually aired. As you might imagine, it wasn't very kind to Richard Nixon, and PBS feared that the government might pull their funding if they were overly critical of the president. Imagine. In 1972, just a few months after The Godfather was released, the film adaptation of Play It Again, Sam opened in theaters, with Keaton reprising her role from the play in the film. Play It Again, Sam was just the first in a series of films written and directed by Woody Allen, which cast Keaton as his romantic interest. The complexity of her roles and her screen time gradually increase with each film, and perhaps uncoincidentally, each one earned better and better reviews. Alan Felix is the Woody Allen romantic lead archetype to a T, a deeply neurotic man searching for a connection but hung up on his sexual inadequacies and desires. His wife recently left him, so he tries to re-enter the dating world but fails miserably time and again. Luckily, Alan is a hardcore cinephile, and Humphrey Bogart appears as a ghostly apparition to give advice about how to behave more like one of Hollywood's leading men and less like a nervous little nerd.
Tell her she has the most irresistible eyes you've ever seen.
You have the most eyes I've ever seen on any person.
Meanwhile, Alan's real-life friends, Dick and Linda, become a lifeline for him, setting him up on dates and becoming a sounding board for his troubles. Linda is particularly eager to help since Dick is so preoccupied with work. And because Alan views her as a friend, he's able to speak to her like a real human being without becoming a nervous wreck, unlike on the blind dates they arrange for him. When Dick leaves on a business trip, she and Alan have an affair that threatens to break up the friend group. Because the film's surreal elements occur only in Alan's mind, Woody really carries the burden of the film's zaniness. Keaton, on the other hand, needs to ground the film in real feeling, to be the lovely, sweet calm in the midst of the madness. But that doesn't mean Linda is bland. She's just as neurotic as Alan, and it's those shared neuroses that unwittingly lead to their short romance. They get along because they speak the same language.
What do you have for an anxiety attack? I need a tranquilizer.
I got everything. I'm a drugstore.
Keaton plays off of Alan's skittishness wonderfully, laughing as he fumbles and lighting up as he notices details about her that haven't been appreciated in a while. Their chemistry really makes the whole thing tick. Indeed, critic Harry Flex said that the rapport between Alan and Keaton made the film a joy to watch. Miss Keaton is genuinely pleasant on screen. One senses a depth in her that raises her characterization above the level of routine ingenue. Her role wasn't huge, but definitely gave the impression that she could really do something if given a good opportunity. Unfortunately, she'd have them. Next came Sleeper, a science fiction comedy in which Alan plays Miles Monroe, a man who was frozen in the year 1973 and unfrozen in the year 2173. The United States has become a police state run by the great leader who reprograms the minds of anyone who resists him. Again, imagine. A rebellion is brewing in the underground, though, and they want Miles to help them take down the dictator. Before he can accept, the police infiltrate the lab and capture the rebels. Miles escapes by disguising himself as a robot butler in the employ of Luna, a ditzy, apolitical poet. Luna is eventually converted into a radical by the underground, and they attempt to overthrow the great leader once and for all. Sleeper is written in the slapstick tradition of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. It's a fantastical farce with plenty of outrageous gags that exposed a whole new physical dimension to Keaton's comic potential. Linda occupied the real world, the calm in Alan's madness. But Luna exists in a world with giant vegetables and robot dogs, and Keaton exaggerates her to appropriately fit that environment. She makes big, expressive choices that elevate routine moments like putting on a pair of gloves into comic gold. Luna isn't the smartest.
Miles, did you ever realize that God spelled backwards is dog?
Yeah, so?
Makes you think.
But she is passionate. She throws herself into everything she does with full enthusiasm, whether it's partying or starting a Marxist revolution. She and Miles are a screwball couple. partners in crime, bickering and improvising as their plans go awry.
You don't realize that you've been dealing with one of the greatest minds you've ever seen.
Yeah, and his isn't so bad either.
Their frustrated banter proves that chemistry isn't demonstrated solely through romance. Their fights are just as compelling as any flirtation in Play It Again, Sam. Love and Death built upon this comic style. Love and Death was Woody Allen's ode to 19th century Russian literature. He plays Boris, who is in love with Sonia, who doesn't love him back, at least at first. Their love story winds through an epic backdrop of history, through poverty, war, in opera houses, prisons, and palaces. They somehow find their way back to each other before a final encounter with Napoleon separates them for good. I don't know why she's fully dressed as Princess Leia here, 2 whole years before Star Wars, by the way. This was Keaton's most straightforwardly comic and substantial role to date. Sonia has far more agency than Linda or Luna, and isn't so easily swayed. She can be vindictive and ambitious, and enjoys playing the game of seduction on her own terms. Like Sleeper, Love and Death demands some physical comedy from her, but her wordplay and tonal finesse is far more sophisticated here. For example, she repeats this one joke structure throughout the film in which she wistfully delivers a hammy rendition of the right line, like the thing you expect a woman to say in these romantic period pieces, only to bluntly reveal her true feelings with a deadpan endnote. So as her husband's dying, she says,
"You were a kind and loving husband, generous and always considerate." What's he got, about 8 minutes?
Or,
"Come to my quarters tomorrow at 3.
I can't.
Please.
It's immoral. What time?
The film allows her to play in this overtly theatrical space, mocking the melodramatics and philosophical gymnastics of these epics with a casual American tone and sense of irony.
I guess you could say I'm half saint, half whore.
Because of these 3 performances, Keaton became known as a genuinely talented comedienne, often compared to actresses famed for their screwball zaniness like Lombard, Jean Arthur, and Katharine Hepburn. Her off-screen persona took on a decidedly zany tone as well. The innate eccentricity Coppola perceived in Diane, and that Allen brought out in his screenplays, was echoed by journalists writing about her in real life too. Many of her interviews were conducted in her apartment on East 68th Street, where her urban bohemian lifestyle took center stage. Photographs she took hanging on the wall, her 2 cats crawling around, her cactuses. She was lounging in bizarre, baggy, black granny dresses with her uncombed, frizzy hair streaming past her shoulders, or maybe sporting a pinstripe jacket and a jazzy polka dot tie like a boy about town. She spoke about going to therapy a whopping 5 times per week and was flamboyantly self-deprecating. Read through any interview from this time and you will almost certainly find her insulting herself. Many journalists remarked upon how she came off as scatterbrained and shy in interviews, never finishing a sentence. Richard Schickel wrote for Time, "Talking to Diane is a bit like playing a record with an unmarked speed. It takes time to get synchronized. At the beginning, she will hem and haw, whistle and giggle, mumble and fumble, shrug her shoulders, and contort her face. She will start a sentence the way she might climb a tree, worried that the branches will crack or that she will climb too high and not be able to get back down." Audiences came to know this Keaton too, as she became a frequent guest on late-night shows.
We haven't seen you for a long time. What have you been doing?
Oh, that's right. Well, I did these,
Her creative partnership with Woody Allen also became a significant part of her persona, which in the mid-1970s wasn't considered a bad thing at all. Allen was increasingly seen as one of film's most important emerging talents, given all kinds of generous superlatives like the American Ingmar Bergman. Their brief romantic relationship was public knowledge, and though it ended, they remained good friends and collaborators, with Allen still producing dynamic roles for her to sink her teeth into. Still, Keaton seemingly understood that she needed to work with other directors besides him, lest she become reduced to his perennial side kook, rather than an actress defined on her own terms. The constant smile leaves her face briefly when she is asked whether she thinks she owes her entire career to Mr. Allen. "I wouldn't say that," she snaps. "Things in life happen. I hope there would be a way for me to work without having met him. I'd have to say that I think I'd be able to work without him." So she decided to branch out in 1976, starring in 2 films not directed by Woody Allen. Both were ostensibly meant to repeat the formula of recent hits, but neither came close to matching the magic of the originals through no fault of Keaton's. First came I Will for Now, a romantic comedy in the vein of A Touch of Class, which had just brought Glenda Jackson her second Best Actress Oscar. She and Elliot Gould play an on-again, off-again couple who attend a sex therapy retreat in a last-ditch effort to revive their relationship. The film feels like it should have been made in 1966, not 1976. It postures as a modern exploration of marriage, but isn't sophisticated enough to make their disputes interesting, and has more timid sexual dynamics than, for example, Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, which came out 7 years earlier. Richard Eder of the New York Times apparently had a similar reaction to mine, writing, I Will should make people happy that they don't make movies like that anymore. Then came Harry and Walter Go to New York, a buddy comedy heist film and a clear ripoff of The Sting, which swept the Academy Awards in 1973. James Caan and Elliot Gould play vaudevillian performers who go to jail for cheating their audience with a mind-reading grift. They meet a notorious bank robber, played by Michael Caine, and steal his plans for the greatest heist of all time. Keaton plays a socialist journalist who agrees to help them execute the heist if they donate some of the money to the poor. You would think that with this cast, the film would have a chance at matching the energy of The Sting, but far from it. It's convoluted, the jokes don't land. Critics broadly dismissed it. The chief interest in watching it is seeing how something so big can be so inept. But they were torn on Keaton's performance. Vincent Canby of the New York Times said that she delivered the only 2 funny moments in the entire film, while others began to worry that she might not have the ability to perform well without Woody Allen's direction. Kathleen Carroll harshly determined in the Daily News that Keaton's performance offered further proof that she needed his steadying influence. Otherwise, she becomes shrill and overbearing. In 1977, Keaton would prove Carroll wrong. Annie Hall is a story about falling in and out of love. Alvy Singer is a comedian with a few failed marriages behind him when he meets Annie Hall, an aspiring singer, at a tennis match with friends. The film jumps around through time, revisiting the highs and lows in their relationship together, interrogating where exactly things went wrong and how these two people grew apart. The film maintains some of the surrealist or absurdist gimmicks of Allen's earlier filmmaking, characters stepping out of their bodies to observe themselves, using subtitles to expose the difference between what a character says and what they actually mean, time traveling together through their pasts. But he doesn't employ these elements for purely comic slapstick purposes. Instead, they serve a sincere, mature sense of romanticism. Annie Hall is a comedy, but structurally and emotionally doesn't neatly fit into the romantic comedy tradition. We don't cut to the credits after the leads profess their love for each other. We cut to the credits after realizing how difficult and terrifying love can be, but how beautiful and necessary it is regardless. Keaton's la-di-da, dizzy charm seems, to me at least, to attract the bulk of the praise towards this performance. And while I totally get it, and believe me, I'll come back to it, I think it also unfairly overshadows the dramatic heft of her work in this film. Because the film covers the duration of Annie and Alvy's relationship, not just the fun falling in love part, Keaton engages in a far more diverse emotional range than in any of her previous collaborations with Allen. The nervous flirtations of their first interactions, the exhilaration of blossoming chemistry, the delirious comfort of deep love, the initial creeping doubts, the annoyance at his personality quirks, which eventually turns to exhaustion and resentment, then guilt for that exhaustion and resentment, before finally a truce, a bittersweet acceptance of the end. Her performance really is quite stunning, and one would imagine quite difficult to achieve, although Keaton insisted throughout her life it was the easiest role she'd ever done.
That was a movie that was completely effortless. That was so easy that it's kind of, that never happens. It was just a charmed experience.
I'd wager a major reason for that ease was that Allen specifically wanted Keaton to lean into her natural instincts as Annie. The screenplay captured the unmistakable essence of Keaton that audiences had fallen in love with on talk shows and that journalists so often described in interviews.
I think that what was interesting about Annie Hall was how Woody captured the language
of me at that time in my life and knew how to write it. And that's really unusual to capture, like somebody who's basically inarticulate. I became famous for being an inarticulate woman. And so that's not hard for me.
I don't know. I wasn't.
Was your inflections in your voice in Annie Hall a voice that you really spoke in, or is it the voice of the character that you found, and what was your process of finding it?
No, I think I spoke in that character at that point in my life.
Oh, okay.
I think that's the way I talked.
Annie borrows Keaton's exceptional yet uneasy charisma, awkwardness as sex appeal, or as Pauline Kael phrased it, apologetic self-doubt as a style. She mumbles through her lines, laughing to disguise anxiety, shifting on her feet, or waving her arms around for expressive effect. Allen included other details of Keaton's life to give the film an authentic texture, too. Her real name was Diane Hall. She really called her grandmother Grammy, ordered pastrami with mayo, and really had become known for singing in clubs like Reno Sweeney's. Most famously, Annie's sense of style came directly from Diane. While Ralph Lauren provided her a tuxedo jacket, most of Keaton's costumes largely were comprised of Goodwill menswear finds that she pulled from her own closet. Still, Keaton was quick to point out the differences between her and Annie. She and Allen did not meet on a tennis court. She didn't smoke pot. She was a Californian through and through, not a Wisconsinite, and she may have had a Volkswagen, but she was not a bad driver. Alvy, of course, was also unmistakably based on Allen, and everyone who saw the film understood that it was a semi-autobiographical portrait of Woody and Diane's actual former relationship. Critics discussed the parallels to their real lives a lot, to the point that Arthur Knight's review in The Hollywood Reporter even described the film as having the feel of a professionally produced home movie blown up. Roger Ebert wrote, Annie Hall is the closest Allen has come to dealing with that real material. It's not an autobiography, but we get the notion at times that scenes in the movie have been played before, slightly different, for real. This blurring of fact and fiction prompted the question, where did Diane Keaton end and Annie Hall begin? The two were conflated from the get-go, with journalists often describing the feeling that they were actually talking to Annie when interviewing Diane. For a moment, I thought she was going to say la-di-da, but naturally she didn't.
I mean, the la-di-da stuff.
I never said la-di-da in my life until he wrote it.
Keaton's performance earned her the best reviews of her career to date. In The New Yorker, she was one of the most dazzlingly and beguilingly funny girls in movies in years, and one of the most comedically pure and brainy actresses in our midst. To The Hollywood Reporter, she was the consummate actress of our generation. While critics found the performance enormously effective, because it was, if you really want to be cynical about it, you could say that a question still lingered over Keaton's head. If Annie was so close to Diane, was it really very much of a challenge? Did this film really do anything to combat the perception that she needed Woody Allen's steadying influence? If it didn't, Looking for Mr. Goodbar certainly did. Judith Rosner's 1973 novel, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, was inspired by the real-life murder of a school teacher by a man she met at a bar. The novel differed from the eventual film slightly, but for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to summarize what happens in the film. We open on Teresa Dunn, a college student secretly conducting an affair with her professor while living at home with her strict Catholic parents. Teresa's home life is oppressive, so after she graduates, she follows her wild older sister into the big city to start living on her own. During the day, she teaches at a school for deaf children, and at night, she explores nightlife, her sexuality, and drug use for the first time. Before long, her life becomes aimless. She meets a series of men, each varying degrees of selfish and aggressive, before she finally brings one home who is himself unsure how to navigate his sexuality and violently rapes and murders her. Teresa's fate wasn't a surprise or a shock or a twist to anyone at all at the time, because the novel was a hit, selling over 4 million copies and spending 36 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, with 3 weeks at number 1. Obviously, a film adaptation would come next, and Teresa would become one of the most coveted women's roles in years. Several major directors, from Mike Nichols to Bob Fosse to Patty Chayefsky, turned down the project before it landed on the desk of Richard Brooks, whose impressive resume included films like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Elmer Gantry, and In Cold Blood. Brooks cast Keaton before Annie Hall became a huge hit. Despite the fact she got the part, neither Keaton nor Brooks were actually confident that she could do it. Brooks confessed to the Daily News, "I never knew she could play the role for sure. I knew she could do half of it, the schoolteacher scenes, and she didn't know for sure either. But she has tremendous range, which we didn't know about. She isn't as fragile as she appears. She's shy, but she's got stainless steel inside of her." So when Annie Hall came out and revealed new layers to Keaton as an actor, it only bolstered anticipation for Goodbar. Keaton's performance in this film is astonishing, particularly if you watch it in the context of her Woody Allen films from the 1970s. Frankly, it's refreshing to see her without him. In Goodbar, she is no longer the foil of an anxious leading man. Her perspectives, fears, desires, curiosities propel the film. We see her interact with types of men and frequent places that never appear in worlds written by Woody Allen. She has hang-ups, yes, but neuroticism doesn't govern her character choices. Annie Hall's hemming and hawing, her frantic gestures, her goofy expressions don't exist here. She moves with far more self-assurance and openness. Teresa may not have been confused with the real Diane, but she nevertheless feels like a real person because she is so multifaceted. At work, she's a great teacher, bright and warm, encouraging the students with patience and a beaming smile. In her free time, though, she's flirtatious and adventurous, excited to try things but not always sure where to draw her limits. She can be petty or sensitive, prudish or erotic, free or burdened. Teresa's sex life is a focal point of the film, and although I hate to use the word brave to describe her performance, Keaton's commitment to these scenes is brave, considering how notoriously self-conscious she was. She and Brooks collaborated closely to ensure that she felt comfortable, and indeed I'd hardly characterize the resulting scenes as exploitative or pornographic. To many feminist thinkers, though, Teresa's death read like a reactionary, fear-mongering tactic to discourage women from imitating her sexual freedom, like her murder was a Hays Code era comeuppance for her sins. I understand this criticism, especially from the vantage point of 1977, when the urgent need for sexual liberation might foster a reluctance to acknowledge the risks posed by freer sex, lest it slow down the movement's progress. But I don't think the film portrays its men dishonestly or unrealistically, with the exception of its queer murderer. The casual violence these men enact certainly feels familiar from the vantage point of 2026. The lies, the outbursts, the inability to accept a simple no, pretending bullying is playfulness.
Give me that coat. Please.
Hold it.
Don't do that.
From the perspective of today, when sexual violence is everywhere in the news, including by Woody Allen, Teresa's experience, to me, leans more descriptive than prescriptive. Brooks anticipated this criticism and sought to avoid making a moral judgment of Teresa. To him, America had yet to reconcile its ambition for permissiveness with the volatile reality of a culture undergoing massive shifts. Misogynist violence is ubiquitous. Erica Balsam wrote in a recent review of the film for 4 columns, and the freer a woman is, the more likely she is to provoke it. By representing this in such lurid detail, with Keaton's beguiling naturalism and eccentric vulnerability attracting the viewer's admiration and identification like a magnet, Goodbar becomes something other than a mere tale of chastisement. It offers an account of clashing value systems in a moment of societal transformation. Annie Hall dominates the current memory of Diane Keaton from 1977, but we shouldn't underestimate the extent to which Goodbar affected the discourse about Keaton at the time. It proved that she didn't need Woody Allen to succeed. Keaton sheds the female half of Woody Allen image quite effectively. And it revealed that she had much greater potential than whatever Allen had thus far imagined for her. Bruce McCabe wrote in the Boston Globe that her portrait of Teresa is so shattering that it adds a whole new dimension to her stature as an actress. Molly Haskell raved in New York Magazine that she gave the performance of a lifetime. Even if you have read Judith Rosner's novel, nothing can quite prepare you for the shattering experience that Diane Keaton has made of it. Andrew Saris in The Village Voice added, Diane Keaton projects the most electrifyingly explicit sexuality ever attained by an American actress in a psychologically plausible movie. The fact remains that with Annie Hall and Looking for Mr. Goodbar coming out in the same year, Diane Keaton is clearly the most dynamic woman star in pictures. Rex Reed made a succinct declaration. If Diane Keaton doesn't win an Oscar for Looking for Mr. Goodbar, there is no God. The 1970s were a bleak time for women at the Academy Awards. In retrospect, it might not seem that way. Quickly reviewing the list of Best Actress nominees and seeing such towering performances as Jane Fonda in Clute, Liza Minnelli in Cabaret, Jenna Rollins in A Woman Under the Influence, Faye Dunaway in Network, and Ellen Burstyn in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, may suggest that complex roles were a dime a dozen. But spend a little time reviewing criticism from that period, and you'll quickly understand that these performances were exceptions, not the norm. Most of our actresses, wrote critic Nora Sayre, have had little choice beyond playing the magic mommy or the naughty nurse. They had little more to do in many films than wince when the men begin to shed blood. In fact, leading roles were so scarce that Judy Clemesrud reported for the New York Times in 1976 that studios and producers have been flailing around trying to come up with somebody, anybody, to push for Best Actress in trade paper ads. So what happened? Why were there so few good roles being written for women? Critics gave a number of reasons, from the shape of the industry to the role of women in society. By the 1970s, American film had turned away from the glossy, synthetic glamour of classic studio films. Those archetypes of stardom, mysterious, held at a distance and above the rest, simply wouldn't suffice in this new era. Glamour took a backseat to gritty realism, and with it, according to Alan McKee in the New York Times, the movie goddess died. Yet what would replace her? According to some feminist thinkers, rather than try to grapple intelligently with shifting cultural attitudes and adapt accordingly, men simply decided that they'd just rather not write about them at all. Shirley MacLaine hypothesized it was a backlash against the women's liberation movement, reflecting a fear upon the part of those who finance movies that the portrayal of intelligent, strong-minded women would deprive the male heroes of their masculinity. The fact is, wrote Molly Haskell, movies no longer reflected our lives, and we, or those of us who still went to the movies, no longer expected them to, nor looked for heroines who worked, married, divorced, thrashed out the conflicts between home and career. The absence of these stories left women wondering when credible female life would appear in American cinema. Where now for Hollywood is the true model for adult woman circa 1977? It's in this context that Annie Hall and Looking for Mr. Goodbar were released. In fact, a sudden slew of fantastic female-centered films surprised critics in 1977. Jane Fonda in Julia, Shirley MacLaine and Anne Bancroft in The Turning Point, and Marsha Mason in The Goodbye Girl were all nominated for Best Actress. And this isn't even mentioning snubs like Shelley Duvall and Sissy Spacek for Three Women, and Liza Minnelli for New York, New York. No Rain for Years, now a flood. Keaton was nominated for Best Actress for Annie Hall, not Mr. Goodbar, probably not surprising given that film's controversial nature. The Academy loved Annie Hall, awarding it 5 nominations, 4 of which it won, including Best Picture. Looking for Mr. Goodbar earned just 2, including Best Supporting Actress for Tuesday Weld as Teresa's sister. Annie Hall's popularity alone might be enough to explain her win on a base level, but I'd also argue that Diane Keaton threaded a very particular needle with her stardom that made her a compelling nominee. First, Diane Keaton satisfied the audience's star craving. The ideas of what it meant to be a movie star and the way that looked may have changed, but that didn't mean people weren't invested in celebrity culture to some degree. It's important to remember that to moviegoers and critics in 1977, Annie Hall was intriguing not just as a romantic drama, but also as a failed portrait of 2 beloved stars. If Annie is Diane and Alvy is Woody, we're encouraged to wonder how much of the film is true. To what degree are we peeking behind the curtain of their lives? Though it's not as extravagantly melodramatic as, say, Elizabeth Taylor relitigating her affair with Eddie Fisher in Butterfield 8, or Judy Garland grappling with the destructive effects of addiction in A Star is Born, Annie Hall nevertheless scratches the same itch, the impulse to apply a movie star meta-narrative beyond the actual narrative of the text. At the same time, however, their relationship gave the story authenticity. Jane Wilson wrote in her article, Hollywood Flirts with the New Woman, that perhaps the single most important feature of Annie Hall is that it is quasi-autobiographical, and thus not only has gossip value, but also a certain edge of credibility. Two real people, Woody Allen and Diane Keaton, actually lived an approximation of this love story, and there is Miss Keaton playing the part of herself with verisimilitude. In the process, she offers one portrait, somewhat eccentric to be sure, but nonetheless lifelike, of adult woman circa 1977. Goodbar played a key role in meeting this definition too. As much backlash as that film received from feminist thinkers, it undeniably spoke to women about their actual experiences. Brooks made sure of that by visiting discos across the country and interviewing hundreds of women about what they thought of the book prior to writing the screenplay. His efforts seemingly paid off. Keaton told the New York Times, "Almost every woman I've talked to identifies with Teresa enormously. In their fantasies, everyone's been hurt, everyone's been mad at men, everybody feels a kind of longing for belonging, everybody feels lost." Articles were even written saying how seeing Diane Keaton specifically in that role made the film feel even more poignant than it might have otherwise. I think it's significant that Keaton was the only first-time Best Actress contender in 1977. By that point, Mason had been nominated before, McClane, Bancroft, and Fonda had been around for decades. Keaton felt new in both a literal and metaphoric sense. She wasn't overtly political and therefore alienating like Fonda or Redgrave. She wasn't a multi-hyphenate inserting herself into other areas of the business like Barbra Streisand. She had no legendary showbiz roots to build her legend like Liza Minnelli. Her beauty didn't have a pin-up quality like Farrah Fawcett or a femme fatale sense of danger like Faye Dunaway. For a generation of women tasked with redefining themselves and their place in society, Keaton offered a new kind of glamour. Not the unflappable, manicured glamour of classic stardom, but something much more honest. A woman willing to express her doubts and fears, but who approached life with enthusiasm and a singular sense of style regardless. Molly Haskell gave this persona a label in her review of Looking for Mr. Goodbar. She put the finishing touches on a type, the anti-goddess, the golden shiksa from the provinces who looks cool and together, who looks as if she must have a date on a Saturday night, but has only to open her mouth or gulp or dart spastically sideways to reveal herself as the insecure bungler she is, as a complete social disaster in her own way, as Allen's horny West Side intellectual is in his. A fit of misfits, a pair of compatible insecurities, they are the romantic couple of the 70s. Far from being a throwback to the 50s, they are ultra-modern in that they give the lie not only to the cool couples of the past, but to the current myth of sexual liberation and come-easy couplings. A sense of Diane Keaton as relatable in spite of her movie star credentials lasted throughout her career. Take this 2000 profile by Daphne Merkin in the New York Times. The piece opens with Keaton fussing over her makeup before shooting a PSA for homeless pets. Merkin writes, "This brief glimpse of backstage vanity makes her seem poignantly ordinary rather than hopelessly shallow or self-absorbed. Less an indication of the narcissistic anxieties of a movie star than the, oh my god, what now, insecurity of a woman who has never been quite sure of her physical allure." Even her wardrobe served this anti-Hollywood ethos, eschewing form-fitting or revealing gowns and heavy makeup for oversized men's suits and floppy hats. Her wardrobe started an immediate trend. The Annie Hall look, or rather, the Diane Keaton look, started popping up on the streets with amazing frequency. The androgyny gave women access not only to the physical comfort of the garments, but also the convenience of a uniform that men get from a suit. By adopting the uniform of the ruling class, they demanded to be taken seriously. Annie Hall was the first of Diane Keaton's 4 Oscar nominations, and the real starting point for her mega stardom. It's amazing to think how many more iconic images she would give us in years to come. Dancing to You Don't Own Me in the First Wives Club, shrieking in a Nancy Meyers kitchen and Something's Gotta Give, corralling a chaotic family Christmas in The Family Stone. It's hard to imagine someone so singular rising and sustaining a career like hers ever again. I'm thankful, at least, that this enormous body of work exists, that we can look back on it and cherish what she gave us.